Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So this one's going to be a little bit different. It is going to tie into World of Warcraft, but it's more of a game design topic, and I'm going to be talking about the MDA framework, and that sounds really technical. It's actually really simple, and it's a really cool little game design analysis framework, and I think that an appreciation of some of its principles and things like that could really help a lot of you as World of Warcraft players. Now, not really in terms of skill, but just in terms of your overall understanding of some of the things that Blizzard are doing, why some changes are being made, and also understanding things like this will really help you in providing feedback, because it might help you just think of the overall picture and how things work. So MDA is a 3-letter acronym, and as always, those 3 letters do stand for something. They are mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. And they're pretty much in a tiered system. You have mechanics, then you have dynamics, then you have aesthetics. And I'll go over what these are. So mechanics are the particular components of the game at the very base level. So stuff like data, algorithms, the really core stuff. Then dynamics is kind of like the actual behavior while you're playing the game and some of the game systems that are created by those mechanics. And then finally you have aesthetics. And aesthetics are the kind of emotional responses and things like that the player has. So let's just take an example. You have a submachine gun in a Call of Duty game. And I know not a lot of you probably like Call of Duty, but it's a really easy example. So a submachine gun mechanically is a little bit different in that you can run kind of fast with it. And that is, of course, because it's a more mobile weapon. It's also got a shorter range and things like that. So because of those tweaked numbers, this allows for a very different dynamic to, say, a rifle. One of the gameplay dynamics of using a submachine gun is you can run and gun. You can be sprinting around, doing your 720 quadra scope, herp derps, or whatever the hell the kids call them these days. And the aesthetic that will provide for the player is a more fast-paced, tension-filled kind of game, and that's what some people could like. So there's an example of the MDA system being applied. You've got a really small mechanical change, which affects dynamics, which then affects what the player, at the end of the day, actually feels while you play your game. Now that's great, but a really important thing about game design and just things in general is that players and developers approach the game from the opposite angles. So in the MDA system, a developer first makes the mechanics of their game. Because obviously you can't make dynamics or aesthetics because they are created by the core mechanics that you make. So you need to make your class in World of Warcraft before you can see how it feels to play. However, players approach from aesthetics. The first thing they really think about when they are playing a warrior, as an example, is, does this feel fun to play? And it's very important, this kind of difference. And it's also extremely important when you're thinking about game design and just how to give feedback to Blizzard and how to interpret things like, say, the patch notes. So yes, developers make mechanics, players consume aesthetics. And there's one thing that I've been saying a decent little bit in videos, and that is that players often know what they like, but they don't know what they want. They know what aesthetics they find enjoyable. They know that maybe in their Call of Duty game that using a submachine gun gives them a desirable emotional response. Maybe they like the tension of that. But do they necessarily appreciate the really nitty-gritty things that the developer thinks about first? Most likely not, for the majority of cases. So it's important that this is understood. Now, players don't really know often anyway, don't know what mechanics would create the dynamics that elicit their desired aesthetic. So maybe if a player was designing a gun in a game, and they know what kind of guns they like to use, but perhaps they wouldn't really know exactly mechanically how to design that. In a way, and that's one of the main differences between being a developer and a player. The developer has to think of, well, what mechanics could I make that people would find fun? Whereas people just think, well, what do I find fun? And, big difference there. And players mostly don't really approach from the side of mechanics, and they most likely don't appreciate how mechanics actually create those gameplay dynamics that they crave. So basically, they're great at saying whether something's enjoyable to them or not, but they often can't really give valuable insight beyond that. So when you're a developer and you're playtesting something, often it's better to just see whether people like something or not, than to change a few mechanics and see if they like it more or less, and try to refine that way, rather than trying to get players to actually design your game, because everyone is going, well, many people anyway, are going to design the game for themselves, and it just won't end up being that good. And really, just the reason why I'm trying to explain MDA in this really sort of small, limited manner is to try just to educate everyone a little bit more on the topic of game design, because I think it really is very important that players understand how games are made, especially in a game like World of Warcraft that's very much a systems-driven game. I see so many people give critique on World of Warcraft's, changes for Warlords of Draenor in the comments of my videos, and to be honest, I'd say the majority of them are maybe not particularly well thought out, in terms of they're just thinking, well, gameplay system X makes me feel angry, remove it, or something like that. Often people don't really try to grasp at a wider understanding of the picture, and how perhaps the particular mechanic that they want to be changed actually works quite well with a few other mechanics to provide really excellent gameplay dynamics that, at the end of the day, make a really fun game. Everything's got this giant ripple-down effect. A small mechanical change could have major consequences for the dynamics of the game, which will in turn affect how the game feels to players. So let's go back to our Call of Duty example with our submachine gun. An SMG, or submachine gun, and a rifle are not massively different from a mechanical perspective. The player aims them, the player shoots them, they deal with recoil and those things. However, since an SMG is slightly different in that it's more mobile and shorter range, it creates vastly different gameplay dynamics. And when you get down to it, the only difference between a submachine gun and a rifle is a few numbers. You'll have a number that's called mobility, and the more mobile you are, then, massive changes in how that gun feels to play. So you can see this giant ripple-down effect that's going on here, and sort of combined with that, you've got a lot of players who are giving feedback that doesn't really take this ripple-down effect into account, and a lot of times when players don't really understand the different perspective the developers are coming from. And I just think that with Warlords of Draenor, Blizzard are definitely asking for a lot of community feedback, and there are certainly a lot of changes that are going on in the expansion. And it's just good that people maybe understand this stuff a little bit more so the feedback can be better. Obviously, you can only really judge gameplay aesthetics when you can actually play the game, so that's one of the nice things about being in the alpha. And one of the reasons I think why Blizzard are not letting too many people in the alpha and stuff like that is because they want to keep a smaller but perhaps better pool for feedback. I know that Mists of Pandaria, they actually let so many people in that they found it extremely hard to get good feedback from their audience, because they let maybe 1 million people into the Mists of Pandaria beta. And if we're going to go back to MDA here, and the people they let into the Mists of Pandaria beta were basically just a cross-section of the World of Warcraft community. So they had a lot of people giving feedback on just, aesthetics and just little things like, oh, Rogues X should be something because I don't like it this way. People not really looking at the wider picture. Whereas I think now that they've got a lot of high-end raiders and stuff like that in, you've got people that can better provide feedback from a mechanical level, because often I think the really high-end players are probably going to have a perspective that's a little bit more similar to the developer when it comes to class design, because they just know so much about a class. However, I've noticed one thing, in that a lot of really high-end players sometimes only think about the other high-end players, and I know that's something that Blizzard are making sure not to, fall into the trap of too much. Warlords is certainly going to be a more accessible expansion from a gameplay perspective, though who knows, it could be harder than Mists. Anyway, look, that video was just to give you guys a little bit of an insight into game design, just to introduce you to one of my favorite analytics frameworks for, for a game, which is MDA, and I just think that even, me understanding MDA allows me to better think when I'm looking at a game. So let's go back to, you see that Momentum video that I did? Now, I noticed, first of all, that I was actually getting a positive emotional response from the way that Rogue's Cloak and Dagger talent worked. And I just thought, right, so I'm finding this positive emotional response. Why is that happening? What's the gameplay dynamic that's causing that? And of course, it was the speed. And this, sort of more fast, stuff where I could teleport from mob to mob and do a lot of damage. That felt great. Then, you think all the way back to, right, what mechanics are creating that? And if you can really work your way from aesthetics to dynamics to mechanics and understand why in depth you are enjoying something, then you're in a far better position to think about giving feedback for Blizzard. So there we go, a little bit of a ramble about game design stuff. Hopefully you managed to find something coherent about it, and I'd certainly just recommend looking up MDA if you want to have any further reading. So yeah, that's it for the video. Thank you for watching, and the Warlords of Draenor stuff will continue on the channel tomorrow.